Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Did you know that your health is impacted by your home? This being the case, how can we create a supportive, healthy home environment? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to uncover hidden health hazards in our home is Caroline Blazovsky. I'll get that one right yet. Caroline is a national health home expert with over 24 years of experience working with the public and physicians to create healthy living spaces and improve wellness. She's investigated over 30,000 homes in her career, looking for correlations to how we live and how it affects our health and wellness. Caroline will be hosting the My Health Home Summit for Earth Week, April 22nd through the 28th. Her website, healthyhomeexpert.com. Caroline, thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You mentioned you're a a healthy home expert. What is that?
So, yeah, my job is to look at homes and investigate them for all kinds of issues. So, we'll look at things like radon, we'll look at mold, allergens, chemicals in the home, pesticides, and see if a homeowner has these things and how it's correlating back to their health. Like, are they experiencing symptoms or could it potentially affect them in the future?
So, what draws people to have you come in and do it? Are they usually having a health problem or considering buying a home, or what's going on usually?
That's a great question. Yes, I think it's all of the above. Sometimes people are experiencing symptoms. Their children have asthma or allergies. Sometimes it's that they're not feeling well. They have autoimmune diseases. People have cancer. Some people are going through real estate or they purchased without doing an inspection. And now they have a home that has problems. So it's all of those things and more.
It seems like an area that's not really well known. I know how important it is just because I've had to deal with some of it with my children and everything, but most people don't even think about it, do they?
No, and doctors don't think about it either. So you'll go to a doctor and you'll get your blood work and you'll get your scans, and they'll say, "Oh, you've got a completely clean bill of health." And you'll walk out and you'll say, "But I get headaches every day," or "I'm stuffy every day," but it's not correlating to the blood work that we see at the doctor's office. So that's when people need to sort of check into their homes and say, "What's going on here? Could it be something in my environment that's making me feel sick?"
Well, we spend so much time in our homes, it only makes sense to check that out first, right?
Right.
So, what's your educational background and certifications in the field?
So I've been in the field 25 years, so I'm dating myself a little bit, but I started as a certified mold remediator. Then I became a certified indoor environmentalist and specialist. So that means I can I'm certified to look and test for homes for all sorts of contaminants. I became through NEHA, which is the National Environmental Health Association, a healthy home specialist. I have education in sustainable design and in public health. So I have a pretty broad spectrum of credentialing, which is nice. And it allows me to really look at your home in a very different way than most people.
Sustainable design, that sounds intriguing. What is it?
So, sustainable design, well, when I went through the program, is looking at how we can sort of be more energy efficient, more friendly to the planet when we build, making sure that we're not using up natural resources and that we're sort of being conservative and conscious of our Mother Earth. And then what I saw actually when I was in programs like this were that we looked at these things like energy efficiency and we looked at what we were building with in terms of how we were using up resources for the earth, but we never looked at health, which was strange. So I chose to focus on the health piece and how our homes affect us and how they can make us feel.
Do you also pay attention to electromagnetics? Say, for instance, when I was designing this home, I made sure to design it's solar. I made sure to design the battery shed and the inverter far away from the bedrooms or where people were going to be spending most of their time. Is that part of the consideration you guys look into?
Yeah.
Is where that's running?
Yes. And that's amazing that you bring that up because I think that's a hot topic right now. We're all worried about 5G, wireless, how these non-ionizing and also ionizing radiations affect us. And yes, that's part of it, looking at like how you're wired in, how you're accessible or inaccessible to the radiation that comes off of all of our computers and electronics. So yes, I love that. It's all part of
Th-
it.
There are some companies out there that have created instruments, little tools
Yes.
that put off the equal but opposite wavelength of that which is damaging to us. Are you familiar with those? And do you think they work?
Yes, yes, there's some great companies out there that do that technologies. Actually, at the summit that we're promoting, that's a free summit, educational summit. We've got three of the best EMF specialists in the world speaking about EMF and how big it's becoming as a part of our livelihood. I mean, you pick up a phone every day, you use a computer every day, and we don't really think about the implication of where that leads us.
Right, it's amazing. I mean, just from when I was going to college, when you didn't even have a calculator, right? It's
Me too.
giving
Me
my
too.
age away. But yeah, now we're just bombarded with it on every front, and it's wonderful stuff. I love the technology, but how much of an impact does it have on our body?
It has a large impact, and they're finding more and more because it just wasn't studied. And you and I are able to talk to each other because of these great communications and technologies. But it's like everything, it's in moderation. And what they're finding is they can really affect our neurologic systems, our cardiovascular systems, cause cancer. All of these things are a concern. So I love that we're really starting to look deeper into it and how we can protect ourselves.
I agree. I agree. So, what are the signs and symptoms that our home may be sick?
That's a good question, and there's so many. So we see headaches are a big thing, right? If you start to have headaches or chronic sinus infections is always a big one for me. Like, are you getting a cold but you don't get over it? It's 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and you're still suffering with a cold. Those are symptoms that you could have mold, that you could have mycotoxins, things that are suppressing your immune system. We look at things like neurologic problems. People may exhibit strange things like nosebleeds, all these sort of fibromyalgia, muscle pain, things that tired, fatigue. All of it is sort of abnormal. And if you're experiencing them, it's time to look into your home and see what's going on.
How about diseases like Parkinson's or MS?
Yes, and they're finding big correlations. We just did a big, again, we're talking about the summit, but we interviewed a big speaker on Alzheimer's disease and the correlations that exist between our homes and this disease. We know that there's different studies, but like one in particular that I'm very familiar with is where they took mice and they exposed mice to large levels of pollution. And suddenly those mice started to develop amyloid plaque, which is that plaque that we associate with Alzheimer's disease. And they also started to have cognitive dysfunction. So we know all these pollution, these particulates, these very fine, less than what we call PM, they're called PM 2.5, that fly through the air, go into our bloodstream very quickly. And that can cause all kinds of immune system problems, dysfunction with cardiovascular, and then also with neurological as well.
What about what's outside coming in? Basically, um, do you take into consideration the environment the home is in? Say, for instance, I live in the high desert, so it's very dry here. I'd have to work hard to get some mold, okay? But I get lots of dust and sand. So, do
In
you
particular.
consider where on the planet that the home is, and does that
Yes.
help you know what
Yes.
to look for?
Yes. And also, I'm not going to let you off the hook because believe it or not, we have mold in all 50 states. We have it in all climates. And that's because we have air conditioning. We introduced a lot of mechanical systems, right? And
Mhm.
what happens with air conditioning is you have condensers in there that can get moldy. You have rainy seasons. So sometimes the ground isn't so prepared for all the rain it's going to get. And then when you do get it, it actually floods into spaces in the home. So believe it or not, work with mold and mycotoxin is ever present everywhere we live, unfortunately.
Well, when we started trying to control our environments, we opened up a whole can of worms, didn't we?
Yes, yes, we did. You're absolutely right.
So, according to public health, only 10% of the detriments to health is related to health care that we receive. Where does the other 90% come from?
So we are seeing so many correlations between how people live and how they feel. And the more we investigate them, so like from my experience, I've looked at 30,000 homes in my career. And what we see are correlations between sick occupants and a sick building. Now, our bodies are like pretty resilient. What's cool is that our bodies actually can take on a lot of burden and be exposed to a lot of things and it doesn't affect us. But when we start to see trifectas or things happening simultaneously, like we see people have mold on top of chemicals, on top of pesticide, maybe EMF, that's when we start to see people complaining about health symptoms and sick occupants. So these correlations, in my opinion, I see big correlations between disease. I think 85% of disease states come from our environments. And when you're in, I was in a public health program at the University of Southern California, and they taught us about the importance of environment and how much it's a social determinant of health. Where you live is going to directly correlate to how you feel. So somehow we forget about it when we end up going to our doctor or we get out in the real world. We just think, oh, our environment doesn't matter, but we know it does in a big way.
Yeah, and it's amazing. A lot of the indigenous people healers would go live with the family if there was one sick occupant because they felt that it was the whole
Amazing.
enchilada was out of balance and they wanted to see where it was. Well, it's about time for us to go into a break. Time is flying already. But on the other side, we'll get into more of how to find out if your home is sick. Carolyn and I will return very shortly. Please don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org, where you find out all the latest about what's happening in the healthcare industry. Is your home making you sick? With us this hour, discussing the hidden health hazards that can be found in our home, is Caroline Blazovsky. Her website, healthyhomeexpert.com. Caroline, we had quite the thing with the pandemic, and pretty soon everybody's running around Cloroxing everything.
Yeah.
um, their hands, everything. What kind of an impact was that? Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease. What kind of impact was
Yeah.
that with all those chemicals that we were using?
Yes, that's such a good point. When I was investigating homes during the pandemic, we started to see a large rise in VOCs in the home and what's called
S- What is a VOC?
yeah, that's good. So a total volatile organic or VOC is a volatile organic compound. So it's chemicals, things that come off our personal care products, that come off our shampoos, fragrance, anything that we use in our home. Most things have VOCs, like even things like wood, which is natural, right? Has a VOC. So chemical compounds.
Okay.
And when I was investigating homes during the pandemic, we saw all these large spikes in chemicals, chemicals, chemicals. And when we started to investigate closer, we saw it was D-limonene, which is that lemon citrusy smell that you get off those hand sanitizers and all of those wipes we use. People were storing them in bulk because they were worried. They'd go to a large box store and they'd buy huge amounts, and it started raising their chemical load in the home, which was not good for us. So we started to see a lot of issues with sanitizers, believe it or not.
So here we are, with our immune system being compromised by chemicals when we're trying to strengthen our immune system to fight off COVID.
That's right.
Oh my
And
goodness.
And also, people, where did you go when you had COVID or you had if somebody thought somebody was getting sick in the home? They'd send someone to a basement. And then we had all these issues where people were like having mold because they were seeing the mold. They were down in the basement trying to separate from their families and not get people sick. And then they started to realize, oh my gosh, we have mold problems in our home too. And then people were working from home and they saw all the different things going on in a home that they weren't addressing because they were out in the field, busy at the office and they weren't staying at home. So it was very busy time for us, believe it or not.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Um, so you mentioned mold. Let's get into mold and mildew and all those wonderful things. What can you tell us about it?
So molds are like people and they need the same things that we need to live. So they need water and food and they need a nice environment. And so when we give them these things like our basements or crawl spaces or even places in our home like under our kitchen sink, we give them a food source, we give them water, we maybe have a drip or a leak, we have water coming in, the mold starts to form. And molds have been around since for eons, since the beginning of time.
But how are they detrimental to us?
So they produce, there's three things that molds can do. So molds are one that's that fuzzy thing you see growing on a piece of fruit or in your shower. That's what we call a beta glucan involved with it and a protein. And that causes like allergies in about 20% of the populace. Then we have molds, the same mold has ability to produce a VOC, which is a chemical. Remember, we talked about VOCs coming from paints and fragrance. Well, molds actually produce what's called an MVOC too. So they produce a chemical.
So then,
Thirdly, yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No,
No,
you
go
go ahead.
ahead.
Yeah. Are,
So thirdly, they can produce a mycotoxin, which is a neurotoxin. Not all molds have this ability, but certain ones have a strength to them, I call them, and they can produce a neurotoxin and throw it out at us like an assault. So if we go down and we start cleaning an area and we think, oh, I'm just going to clean up the boxes, and the mold is there that can produce this neurotoxin, it starts throwing it out into the environment and we get very sick.
so they can defend themselves too.
They're very smart. They've been around since before us. They exist and they basically want to survive. And in nature, we need them to break down leaves and stone sticks and branches and all the wonderful things that they do. But inside of our homes, they create all kinds of problems trying to break down our home environment.
Does the fact that we, like, say, for instance, they're building up in a shower, well, there was lots of chemicals in the shower to start out with. Does that um, impact what they put back out?
So if you clean them and you have a problem and you don't clean them thoroughly, like you don't clean everything away, they actually signal to other molds in their colony and say, we're being attacked. Please send out mycotoxin if they can. Not all molds can. So they want to defend themselves. And then people get very sick in their homes and they just let the mold proliferate and they don't pay attention. Like if you have mold, you need to address it. Don't let it go. And you won't end up with these problems. But people, we get lazy or we don't want to acknowledge it and, or we don't see it.
It's like a horror movie. It came from beneath the sink. So, what are the
Yes.
physical signs that we might have that we're dealing with mold?
That's great questions. Headaches, stuffiness. You feel that you have colds longer than you should. Your immune system feels down. You feel sluggish. Allergies, a cough, all like a lot of upper respiratory things. Some people actually get stomach aches from it and feel very sick to their stomach, so they have a lot of irritable bowel. So all of those are symptoms like, hey, maybe we should be checking our home. But you should be checking anyway every 3 years. Like before you ever get to the point that you have a symptom, check your home environment.
How do you do that?
So there's lots of ways you can hire an inspector. Someone like myself can come in and inspect. There's test kits available now where you can get a test kit and do it yourself at home and then send it away to a lab. You just want to make sure you're always using laboratory analysis. You want to be using a reputable place. Um, if you go to acac.org, it's a wonderful resource. They have all different types of environmental investigators that you can choose from in your section of the world. So I love that, they're reputable, they have insurance, they make sure that they stay up with their continuing education. So making sure you do it with a professional, but always like every 3 years, you really need to be checking to see if you have any issues going on.
Particularly if you have somebody that's a little compromised in the home, I would think, elderly or somebody that's
Yes.
sick. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We start off, compromised in those situations to begin with. So it's very important to make sure that the mold's not going to compromise you more.
The being exposed to molds, okay, so you're slowly but surely getting sick. Then you discover you have mold. How do you get rid of it without adding to the toxic load?
Well, sometimes you can really get rid of it with a general contractor. Like if you have someone who's really going to quarantine off an area and you have a very small area, like maybe 10 square feet, you can do these types of things with a general contractor. And sometimes you can do it yourself if you're very handy. You just want to take precautions to cover yourself, cover your, mouth, and make sure that you're not getting anything exposed through any type of your eyes or your mouth or you're breathing it in. But if you can do that yourself, but when you start to get bigger with problems, when you start to get over 10 square feet, then I recommend dealing with a remediation company and a home inspector, finding someone who can do mold testing for you, finding out what kind of mold you have, making sure that it's contained to the area that we think it is, and then removing it with a professional.
So do they use chemicals to remove it? And if so, how do you mitigate the effects from that?
Yeah, they do. We've come a long way with that because we know that these biocides that we use can be very, dangerous to us. So a lot of the companies and my company included, we're doing so much more with green and natural products. There's a lot of products out there now that are natural disinfectants where you don't have to use a toxic chemical anymore. And also doing a lot of HEPA vacuuming, making sure you're using like a mild surfactant to remove things, hydrogen peroxide. A lot of these things work great with remediation, and we do them now to keep everybody safe. Exactly.
I know there's a lot of natural things that work really, really well that we could replace like some of our hand sanitizers with like some essential oils if you get really high quality ones.
Oh, yeah.
Can do the same thing. Have you worked with those at all?
Yeah, we try to encourage people to really use less is more, using like unscented soaps. We really try to stay away from fragrances because fragrances add to that VOC. They're chemicals. That's when you smell something, it smells great, but it's a chemical. So are essential oils, believe it or not. They're volatile organic compounds too. And so anything too crazy starts to launch up that level and makes it unhealthy for you. So we try to say go with unscented, use products like hydrogen peroxide works great, soap and water works great, dusting, making sure that you're dusting effectively. You always dust from the top down in a room. Make sure you're using a damp rag. All of those things are really important. HEPA vacuuming, making sure your vacuum is in good shape. You have HEPA filtration, a sealed bag system. All of this is really important. And it's not necessarily to use a lot of chemicals. We just have to do the procedures properly and make sure we're using the right things and dusting properly.
There's just no replacing good old elbow grease, is there?
No, you're absolutely right.
I
Though
think that's
I have to admit technology is getting there. I mean, we really have these great vacuums now, right? That vacuum for
oh
us,
yeah.
and they've come a long way. So being able to use technology like to censor, I mean, we use sensors now to tell us what's wrong in our home. We use technology for vacuuming to make sure we're cleaning more effectively with monitors. So use technology to your advantage because we've come a long way and it can really help us.
It is amazing where we've come with that, isn't it? So we're about to run out of time in this segment, but um, if you're testing your home, okay, and you have a professional come in and test it, how do you prioritize? What are you looking for first?
I listen a lot to the client, the occupant, like what their concerns are. Some people just want to test. So we'll start with we'll look at allergens and mold first. That's always important to me because we all have that. Dust mites are everywhere. We shed 500 million skin cells a day. That's
That's
a lot. We're not hyperallergenic humans. Like we shed everywhere. So making sure that you're checking these things and where your numbers are. We all have we all have dogs, proteins come into our home, horses. This is stuff we pick up. We go to the grocery store and we bring it into our environment, believe it or not. So starting with allergies and mold is a really good, like I'd say the beginning. And then you can kind of go into all types of other areas if you want to.
so when we get back from a commercial break, I'd really like to get into what all the other hidden areas that we don't even think to look are. But I have to ask you, did you say have a horse in your home?
You can end up with horse in your home. We can talk about it when we come out of the break. It's a great story.
It brings up some interesting mental images, doesn't it? So Carolyn and I will be right back to continue our very fascinating discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. How can you tell if your home is sick? Mission Evolution radio show is coming to you on the Exxon Broadcast Network. With us discussing home health hazards is Caroline Blazovsky. Her website, healthhomeexpert.com. So just before the break, Caroline, you were talking about having a horse in your home, and you promised that you would clarify that.
So, what's interesting is we can go out into our environments and pick up proteins. And I had a client, very interesting, in the Hollywood Hills, right? So, in the middle of Hollywood, this beautiful home, 30,000 square feet, ginormous mansion, most beautiful place you could imagine. And the occupant, he was sick and he wasn't feeling well. And he'd gone to his doctors and he got his blood work and he got his scans and he got all of his tests done and they couldn't figure it out. They said, look, we don't know why you're not feeling well, but we know there's a woman in the Northeast in New York, and she does this type of thing and figures out where people might be having some type of health issue in their home environment or their environment. So we started talking, and I said, would you mind if I did some protein testing and some mold testing, which I did, and it came back that he had a lot of dander in his home. So I said, okay, where can we go with this? Like, let me try to analyze what this dander is made out of. Well, I sent it to the lab, and sure enough, it came back that it was loaded with horse protein. Now, he never had a horse. He lived in a mansion in the middle of the Hollywood Hills. But where did it come from?
Yeah, that's a mystery. Did you ever find out?
We did. So he had a massage therapist who used to come into his home, and she had horses. And so she was carrying it on her person and bringing it into the home, dropping it when she was visiting, working on him, then leaving the house. And it got bigger and bigger, got into tapestries and textiles, and it was making him sick.
My goodness. How long did it take you to figure that out?
It wasn't long because once we did the testing, the lab called right away and sort of signaled to us that there was an issue. And it's amazing, but we are a community. We share everything, and just because you don't use it doesn't mean you don't pick it up somewhere else and bring it in. So you go to the grocery store every day, right? We're all out shopping, and we're in contact with all kinds of people.
So the Orientals knew what they were doing when they change shoes every time they change rooms. They take off shoes and put on slippers when they come in the house, and then they had different shoes for every room in the house. Now you're starting to see where that custom came from. Yes.
Absolutely. We carry
Mm.
all these things. And that's the first thing I recommend to my clients. Have outside shoes and inside shoes. You don't want to be walking around in pesticide, petroleum product, gasoline, all these toxic chemicals, and then walking into your carpet. Your carpet becomes the filter, and we don't want that.
And your baby is crawling around on it, right?
Yes, exactly.
So speaking of carpet, where do you stand on, right now I know the hard surface has really become popular. And you mentioned that carpet is a filter, but it also helps by filtering, doesn't it?
So the carpet's an interesting thing. The problem that we don't like about it is it has a lot of dyes and colors and petroleum and chemical. They've gotten a lot better at reducing formaldehyde in carpeting, which it used to be. Formaldehyde is a VOC that we talk about and a carcinogen. In our homes, formaldehyde is ever present, especially in the United States. We build a lot with products that are laden with formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen. So carpets were always a concern. The thing that I like about carpet is I kind of have to look at the occupant, like look at who's living in the home and what they might need. So if we're talking about someone who's got severe allergies and asthma, I absolutely want to go hard surfaces because I don't want to collect anything. When I'm talking about someone over the age of 65 that may take a spill or may take a fall, then I start to look at I might rather prefer to have carpeting in that space than to have maybe something like a tile where if you fall, you're going to break a hip or an arm or something that we don't want. So it really, I look a lot at what the occupants are doing, the age of the occupants. That's very important to my job and seeing what they need. And that's the same with filtration and other things too, like what's going to help that person the most.
So, are there carpets out now that are much less impactful on our health, like green carpets, if you will?
Yes, yes, and yes, exactly. Like we've reduced the chemical load. Also, you can always go with like a thinner Berber carpet that's not going to hold on. Like where if you have a plush carpet, it's going to hold on to a lot more. And also treating that carpet with respect. Like don't go out and wear outside shoes in your carpet. If you know you have pets and they're going to go run around in the mold and everything else outside, you kind of carpet may not be the best thing for you. So really think about what you're doing in that home, and then you can put things in and cosmetically that are gonna be better for you than others.
So, we've been talking about the inside of the home. What about the outside of the home? A lot of people have these lovely, pristine yards, and they're out there with the Roundup.
Oh.
Um, how much of that gets into the home, and how can we mitigate it?
So just so your audience knows, like for an example, when we're talking about glyphosate is people are familiar with that. That's Roundup or any kind of pesticide or herbicide. These things travel. They're not always just confined to your yard. Even though they're designed to sort of stick to the grass, if you will, they get in. And so when I was testing homes across the country, we see that this ends up in your ductwork. These pesticides and herbicides actually end up in your HVAC system. So you may not be using it, but if your neighbor is using it, it can make its way in. So you have to think about that when you're using these products if you choose to. Obviously I recommend an organic way. I mean, I prefer not to have chemicals, and there's a lot of things you can do. You don't People often think, "Oh, I have to use this to get rid of a weed." There's a lot of great solutions you can look at on the net. And then also using really high concentrations of white vinegar work great. So you can actually spray those on weeds and not have to use the toxic chemicals, which we prefer for you, for sure.
Another thing is looking around where you live. Okay, you might be pristine about what you're putting on your own plants and grass, but you might be parked right next to a golf course, say for instance. Are there cases where people just simply have to move?
Yes. Yes, of course. Because you can't control everything. You can't control your environment. believe it or not, too, like when you talk about some people live in the woods, and we were talking about formaldehyde, which is an interesting, it's a chemical, right? And we talk about it's a carcinogen. Wood and trees actually produce formaldehyde. Even though something's natural, doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you. So people who live in the woods, if they're very susceptible to formaldehyde, they may exhibit symptoms or may not feel well because of their outside environment, because the woods naturally contain chemicals.
What would be the symptoms of that be?
We see people usually headaches. They'll see shortness of breath, eye irritation, lung irritation. Those types of things come with formaldehyde. Like a new building construction, you talk to people who go in, they have that kind of stone feeling. They don't feel right. That's all from the chemicals. When you build a new home or a new building, or you get new carpeting, you'll hear people talk about not feeling well. That's a
Mhm.
lot of the symptoms you'll feel when you're exposed to high VOCs and high formaldehyde.
So if you're doing new construction, you can pretty much pay attention to everything you put in your home, can't you?
Yeah, we've gotten to that point where you can make better choices. And that's why we educate people about this, is that don't just go blindly and accept a product. Like, you really need to know what you're putting in. And some of these things have long standing effects. Like, we're hearing about PFAS. Maybe people have talked about these non-stick non-stick chemicals that have ended up in the environment and our water. That's a big thing now. The EPA just announced that they're going to be addressing PFAS in the water because it's become such a big chemical that's just all over the planet. They're finding it in very remote places. So making better choices on your products is very important, and also questioning the manufacturers. Like, really, put your money into items that are going to make a difference, and realize that your money has power. And so forcing these companies to create better products is always a wonderful way to spend your money.
And there's a lot more awareness coming this way, thanks to people like you. So the pressure's on to the companies, isn't it?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we'd like to say that, we are getting smarter, and we know that this area of our home is never looked at, and it's somewhere we spend a lot of time. And now, because of, COVID, more people are working from home than ever. So
Hmm.
we're in our environments, and there's no one checking your environment. You're your own police officer for that space. You need to be the one monitoring, because who's checking your air quality? No one.
HEPA's not here, right?
No, exactly.
So,
Exactly.
um, how about our heating and cooling systems? That looks like it might be a bucket of worms.
Yeah, that is a bucket of worms for sure. But that's what we're talking about. You're responsible for your heating, your air conditioning, your water quality. If nobody's checking that, you need to check it. So HVAC is one of those areas that I walk into homes all the time, and people say, I said, "Have you changed your filter?" And they say, "What do you mean I have a filter?" And I'm like, "Yes." And then I get into these places and I see these filters that you're breathing in, and it's horrible. So you need to know how your heating and air conditioning works. There's so many different types of heating and air conditioning. Some people have baseboard heat. Some people have a blowing system. We call it the forced hot air. Some people have a heat pump. So know what you have in your home and how your home heats and cools. It's very important. It's like, don't be a homeowner if you're not going to know this technique. You need to know what you're using and how it operates, and if you have filters to change. And then with air conditioning, of course, we've got to maintain it so we don't get mold.
So a lot of the things that we might install, like water filters, to help with our health, if we don't pay attention to the age of the filter, we might be making it worse.
Yes, absolutely. And that happens frequently. It's the same with pure air purifiers. People buy them and then they run and run them and don't change the filter. And that's not hermetically sealed. So everything you capture in that unit or that air purifier sits in the corner of your room. And if you're exposed to cat and there's cat in there, you're still going to have allergies. You need to change these filters regularly and make sure you're keeping up with the maintenance. It's huge. People just buy it, they set it and forget it, and you just can't do that. So follow your manufacturer's recommendations and change the filter.
So it could actually be causing more problems than not if you aren't maintaining it.
Yes. And sometimes it's better not to actually use a filter. Sometimes people put filtration on water and make it worse. And so you really test your water, know what you have, and then apply these solutions if you need it. You don't go to a doctor and just say, "Doctor, I'm going to start taking pills." You diagnose the problem and find out what you have, and then you treat accordingly. It's the same thing with your home. Test your air, know what you have. Sometimes your air is perfectly fine. You don't have to do anything. It's great. Test your water, it may be great.
So test, test, test,
Yes, I
and then more
believe in
tests.
Yeah, but to a point. I mean, you don't have to go crazy, but you have to have some sort of baseline as to where you are. And then you can implement these technologies. And there's so many great technologies to help you, but only when you need it, because we want fresh air, we want fresh water. At least, anytime you have to do mechanical anything, there's a plus and minus to that. So you
Well,
want to try to go natural.
is that magic moment? We need to take another station break. Carol and I will continue to explore how to make our homes healthy. So you stay there. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. How many hidden hazards do you have in your home? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Caroline Blazovsky. Her website, healthyhomeexpert.com. Caroline, let's look at our kitchen cabinets, our cookware and such. Is there a problem there sometimes?
Yeah, we were talking about that PFAS, right? These non-stick chemicals that make non-stick surfaces. So we often associated them with Teflon, or we had those pans that, you make your eggs, it's not going to stick. But they're finding now that a lot of those chemicals are very bad for us, right? And they're ending up in our water supply, they're ending up throughout our home and causing all kinds of different disruption, from endocrine disruption to potentially cancer. So yes, like what you're cooking on is very important. You want to stick with the things that are kind of non-toxic, glass, making sure you're doing ceramic, things that aren't going to have these coatings to them. They make our lives easier, but they also promote a lot of potential chemicals.
Uh, there was an old one that people used for years, and I believe it's been linked with Alzheimer's, and that would be aluminum.
Yes. Mhm.
So, what do where is that hidden sometimes, and
Yeah.
what does
And
it
look,
bring with it?
it's interesting you bring up aluminum, because it's one of those things that we've kind of forgotten. I mean, it's still around. I mean, we have aluminum foil, we have all kinds of aluminum products, and it's not one of the things that you search for. But it's actually been, yes, I agree with you. It's one of those things you want to watch and try to minimize. All heavy metals in general, like when we talk a lot about metals, we look at when we're looking at water, we're looking at a lot of lead, right, is a big one, because that's in our water. We're looking at things like arsenic, which is a carcinogen that ends up in our water. Water is another thing that we test for when we're looking at your home. Like, what are you getting when you turn on the tap?
Sometimes it's probably pretty scary what you're getting when you turn on the tap. Do the pipes coming into the house, like say you've purchased an older house, are there some of the pipes that are actually causing problems?
Yes. And believe it or not, the water, if you're on municipality water, right, you have a water treatment facility that treats your water. You are responsible. Once that water hits your home, now it's your responsibility as the consumer. And people don't think about that. And also, when the water leaves the plant, what where it goes before it reaches you is very interesting. It comes in contact with all types of organic material. Pipes, like you're talking about, could be rusted, have lead. We've seen that a lot in like Flint, Michigan, where there were high exposures to lead. And also the water, if you're using chlorination, and chlorination is how you're treating the water from the water plant, you end up what's called chlorination byproduct in your water, and those are carcinogens. So that's a very interesting thing to look for. And that's why we filter a lot. If you have a lot of chlorination byproduct in your water, we're going to want to take that out. So yes, your water it's a big topic, and it's something that has to be monitored. The experts are recommending every year you should be testing, and we don't do that.
So the byproducts are pretty interesting. So that you can have water that's been chlorinated, sit it out, let the chlorine gas off, but you still have carcinogens as a result of the chlorine.
Yeah, so as the chlorine goes, as the water goes through the pipe and the chlorine starts to come in contact with organic material that's in those pipes, it forms a chlorination byproduct. And what was interesting, in the US back in 2009, President Obama put a team on cancer, and they wanted to see what were some of the bigger causes of cancer in the nation, in the world. And basically, they came across chlorination byproduct as being one of the big carcinogens that we have to worry about in our water, as well, believe it or not, as X rays. So, what we talk about ionizing radiation. So, these are things that we can see in our home. We get ionizing radiation, not necessarily from X rays, but we get it from radon and radiologicals that come from the earth. So, it's a natural thing producing this. And then we get it in our water. Those are just two things. And then we talked about formaldehyde. Those are three carcinogens right there that we're exposed to on a regular basis in our homes.
And pretty soon, we just go on overload.
Yeah, exactly. It's not
Yeah.
wonder why the cancer rate is climbing. And I think what's most concerning is we're seeing a large cancer rate climbing in young Americans, right? So the ages 25 to 45, we're seeing a high cancer rate. And to me, that's alarming. That's concerning. We shouldn't see young people getting cancer. I don't like to see older people getting cancer, but especially, young people. So looking into why we are exposed to so many carcinogens and where that could be coming from, I happen to believe that our environment is a big contributor to that.
So it's that time in the show, and I get to ask you, Carolyn, what is your mission?
My mission is to make homes healthier, but to help improve healthcare, help improve disease, remove disease states, and kind of see where we can make a difference using our environment as a tool, and specifically our homes.
Where would you start if you don't have any particular symptoms, but we've watched this or we've watched your summit coming up, and we're going, "Ooh, I want to look into that." Where would you start?
I would do some basic testing. I would definitely do water testing because that's something that we know it's more prevalent than we realize. And then I would do some type of mold and allergen air testing in my home to find out how much inflammation factors I have. Like, do I have mold? Do I have allergens, particulate, dust, dander? These things cause inflammation in the body. And so if you kind of look at how disease works, disease is kind of inflammation affecting us in different places. So what a lot of the functional medicine doctors are recommending now is that we reduce inflammation in the body. And when we reduce inflammation, a lot of these disease states kind of can help resolve themselves and the body can kick in and do what it has to do. So, reducing inflammation factors in your home and seeing where you have those and you can limit them would be great.
What resources would you use for these tests? Where would you look?
There's so many good tests. I mean, I'd probably do a DIY. Like there's a test kit that I love, the Examiner, where you can do it yourself and you can test for allergens. And then if I started to see there were problems on a DIY, then I'd hire an environmental consultant to come in and evaluate my home. So there are a lot of good resources. Oh, and the other thing you can do too is pick up a monitor. We're getting really good with they kind of look like a little Alexa and you put it in your space and it has an app to your phone, tells you your temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide, volatile organic compounds, those chemicals we talked about, your carbon monoxide, CO2, oxygen, ozone. So it'll tell you all these readouts and you can watch it and then actually know if you have an issue. And then if you do, you can call a professional to come in. So I love that. Like that technology can do it for us.
That's amazing. What'd you call that thing?
It's one that I like is called the Yoo-Hoo. It's called UHOO, and it's a monitor that does like a very broad spectrum of analysis for you, and you can just put it in your home, at your desk. I have one in my home, and I love it because it kind of keeps an eye on things for me when I'm not even there. So I know like if there's an issue or if I were to have carbon monoxide, which is obviously can be deadly. So it's wonderful.
Particularly, I would think with people that are already compromised, if they can keep track of what's going on in their home and mitigate that before it gets out of hand, I bet that would go a long ways towards helping with inflammation, say, for instance.
Oh, they should. Anyone who is immune compromised should definitely be utilizing the tools available to make sure their home environment is the best. We can't always control what's out there in the world, but I love that we can come back to our environments and our bodies can kind of reach that equilibrium and sort of homeostasis and calm down. And then we can go out into the world and be bombarded with our chemicals and then come back. But you need to have a place that's sort of low, a very healthy, low chemical load environment. I mean, it's common sense.
And doesn't it give our bodies a chance to detox when they're
Yes.
not being bombarded all the time?
100%. We need that break. And we're learning more in the world that we live in now that we really need to detox more and force ourselves to go into detox, whether it's sauna or we're using other technologies. We really need to be detoxifying a lot of these chemicals. And I think that's the wave of the future is a lot teaching our bodies and how to do that. And then also, of course, reducing sources is always important.
Um, about cooling and heating, I think that's because we do a lot of that.
Mm.
What kind of a heating system do you find is the most healthy?
Well, I prefer baseboard heat systems or baseboard heating in general, or if you're talking about radiant flooring, something that's not going to blow dust around, right? But unfortunately, we have a lot of forced hot air, which is that blow. You turn on your vents and it blows air out, cool or hot, and unfortunately, that creates some problems. Um, And that's when you have to be making sure you're filtering, and then also making sure that system, like we said, you can get mold growth inside those ducts. So making sure that you're having it serviced. I love duct cleaning, making sure someone can actually stick a camera in there. I call it the colonoscopy of our homes, like sticking your camera in and looking at what your ducts look like. Like, do you have debris in there? Do you have mold in there? And that's important if you have HVAC. It's so important.
So, what is your vision for building healthy homes in the future?
Oh, I love that question. I see homes so differently. I see them built with nature and according to sort of natural law, and trying to use and sort of incorporate the things in the world into our homes. Like, we need lighting. We recently talked at the summit, which I never knew. I learned 2/3 of our body runs on light. And what's happening now with energy efficiency, right? We're building these homes where our windows don't even let in real natural light. We're blocking them out to save on energy. We're building houses tighter. We're making sure that we don't get as much natural lighting, and we're using a lot of blue light, fluorescent lighting. So all of that creates issues, and we need light. So building houses in accordance where we're getting these more natural things, fresh air and lighting, to me would be a win in a big way.
Absolutely. Well, we're just about out of time. What do you have to say to our worldwide audience in closing?
Please, if you are exhibiting symptoms and you have no known cause to them, and you've gone to your doctor and you've looked into this, and nobody has any answers, check your home. Make sure you can, do some air testing, do some monitoring, find out what's going on in your environment, and you'll find that there probably is something there that needs to be corrected.
Well, Caroline, it's been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for taking time, and
Thank you for having
good
me.
luck with your summit.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we are out of time for this show. So, our guest this hour has been Caroline Blazovsky. Caroline is hosting this My National Home Health Summit for April. It's going to be between April 22nd and 28th this year. Find out more about Caroline and her summit and all she has to offer. Visit her website, healthyhomeexpert.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit our website, www.missionevolution.org. But more importantly, please be sure to join me right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to our rapidly evolving world.